Hey class, what I'd like to do in this video is to go over the Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman and just give you some insight into possible interpretations for it. This is a story that it's not really going to be feasible for me to make a video saying, here's what the Yellow Wallpaper means, because it's a pretty subjective story. Reading it basically has three possible avenues of interpretation, and we'll go over those three possible avenues, but I want to do something a little different in this video than my other ones, and I want to try to give you just some general uh, key points to begin with, and then we'll move into uh, my marginal notes that I have made in my own copy of the story that are minor details. And I'm hoping you can use those minor details that I bring up to kind of plug into the interpretation that you find most interesting for this really great short story. So let's start a little bit with the author's background, because Charlotte Perkins Gilman has an interesting connection with the story she creates for her narrator in the Yellow Wallpaper. Now, it's dangerous in literature to say that the writer and the narrator are the same voice. However, I do think that sometimes, if not oftentimes, people would be tempted to write what they know. And so, a lot of times, if you look into an author's biographical background, you may find some information that can help you understand what's going on in the stories that he or she writes. And I think that's what we have going on here, because Charlotte Perkins Gilman, when she had her child, suffered what we would call today postpartum depression. Now, the problem is they didn't have the term postpartum depression back then, and so a doctor prescribed Gilman the same rest cure that our narrator goes through in the story. And Gilman was obviously not a fan of this rest cure that was prescribed to her. I think audiences today, we would understand that if you're dealing with someone with any kind of depression or any kind of neurological disorder, it's not a good idea at all to prescribe them isolation, solitude, and not letting them do anything. Uh, but that was the basic treatment back then. That was the rest cure that was popular, especially for any for women who would complain of any kind of, not even just uh, any kind of mental disorder or anything, but just emotional um, conditions that the powers that be would deem unfit or unwanted. So you can definitely see in this story the narrator's frustration with the rest cure that she's prescribed by the patriarchal authority of John. And you also see kind of this disconnect with the physician and the patient, because we know early on in the story, the narrator is convinced that John doesn't really think there's anything wrong with her. And we'll come back to some of those details as well. But it is interesting to see that there is the biographical connection between Gilman and her own struggles with depression after childbirth, that we also see the narrator of this story suffers as well. The cool thing about the story is it actually was successful in initiating some change in how psychiatry at the time kind of handled women in treatment. And a lot of doctors started to question the effectiveness of the rest cure after reading the story. The story goes that, and I don't know if it's true or not, but the story goes that Gilman's own doctor expressed regret for having prescribed the rest cure to her. But there's also some people say that after he'd publicly done this, that he moved away from the rest cure after reading the story. Some people say he moved back to it later on. So I'm not really sure if the doctor of Gilman long term changed his mind about the rest cure's effectiveness, but I do know that it did start a movement into re examining effective ways to help women who needed help, as our narrator of this story obviously needed help and obviously did not receive it. So let's go through the narrator a little bit. We have here a classical case of what's called an unreliable narrator. And these unreliable narrators, I guess they can be fun in some ways, but they can also be very frustrating because there are several writers who are very skilled with handling an unreliable narrator. That's going to be a narrator that you can't really trust. the you can't really trust the perspective that you're getting from the narrator because they may have certain biases. The information's going through a filter that you are seeing, and that filter may be skewing uh, the experience of the story. There, an author that comes to mind when I think of unreliable narrators, Edgar Allan Poe is really good at making unreliable narrators. He really liked us um, reading stories through the voice of, a mentally unbalanced narrator. I'm not really sure we have that going on here. That's one of the interpretations here, that our narrative voice throughout the story is just mentally unbalanced, but we can come back to that later on. Um, some of the frustrations here, we know a whole lot about stuff that we may not care about, but the narrator cares greatly for it, such as the yellow wallpaper. I mean, we have a lot of details on the yellow wallpaper as far as what the pattern looks like, what it does, possible patterns of the wallpaper, although ultimately there really doesn't seem to be a pattern. The pattern seems to be that it's just kind of obtuse, and that there is no pattern, although she's trying to figure it out. But we know we know how it smells, we know how it looks, we know the condition of it, but we don't know a lot about the narrator's life that we may want to know. For example, we know hardly, we do not know hardly anything about the child that the narrator has, and we'll come to that in some of the marginal notes. But that's just, when you're reading a story that's being told by an unreliable narrator, you're at their mercy. And so you have to keep that in mind as far as it can help you. If you understand you have an unreliable narrator, you can assess the condition of that narrator by paying attention to the details that matter to the narrator and the details that don't seem to matter to the narrator. This also causes some confusion for the ultimate interpretation of the story. For example, John, we'll question, who exactly is John? Is John someone different than the narrator is telling us? We'll also question the setting. If our narrator doesn't seem to be in her right state of mind, can we trust that the setup of why she is where she is that she's telling us is correct? My answer to that would be probably not, and you need to be aware of other details that may question the reliability of the story the narrator's giving us, to see what kind of contradictions come up, and then also decide if those contradictions warrant a different interpretation. And we'll come to many of those contradictions. So let's talk about the three basic ways people try to interpret this story. We have mainly three ways. I guess there could be other ways to interpret it, but this is basically seen as either a story of possession. And what I mean by that is, like, if you think about it, there are several details of the story that may suggest that our narrator, when she arrives at the house that they rent out, and while she's going through her rest cure, that she's being contaminated by the house, possibly possessed by the house or spirits within it, those phantoms that she sees behind the wallpaper. We'll point to details where, at the beginning of the story, she definitely sees that the phantoms are separate from herself, that the women that she sees trapped behind the wallpaper are outside of her own identity. But that changes. By the story's end, she connects an equal sign to herself and to the phantom that's trapped behind the wallpaper, so she becomes that phantom. So some scholars read into this that this is kind of like a ghost story. I mean, the story starts with kind of an old dark house atmosphere of haunting and things like that. And so it's a perfectly fine interpretation that this is the story, a ghost story that shows uh, the possession of a woman and her struggles in dealing with that possession, and her ultimate loss of dealing with that possession. That the story's end where she's creeping around on the ground. She's not even human anymore. She's completely overtaken by the phantom or phantoms. Now, there's also interpretation that, if you know about Gildan's background, her biography, That biography may support the interpretation that this is the story of a sane woman who is driven insane. And she's driven insane by the doctor who's trying to treat her. That doctor is not only her husband, but also her medical physician, and ultimately a symbol of patriarchal male authority, that male voice looking at problems and saying, well, here's how to fix it, and ultimately not knowing how to fix it, but also refusing to admit that they don't know how, that what they're trying to do doesn't work, and just persisting that they are right. And John does this, man, lots of times. So we'll look at several details from the story that may support this is the story of a woman who may have arrived staying here. It's just she what they would call now possibly baby blues, that there was no disorder with her, there was no mental deficiency or anything like that. She just may have been led into a situation that took her from uh, a perfectly healthy state of mind, or if not perfectly healthy state of mind, at least a competently healthy state of mind. And then the treatment that she's given drives her to insanity. Okay. And then the last interpretation that I've seen is that this is a story of an insane woman and just her descent into further insanity. That she may be insane when she first starts speaking to us at story's beginning, and that insanity is only exacerbated through the treatment that she gets, instead of the treatment pulling her out of the madness that she seems to be gripped by. It seems to drag her further down. So we'll go through the marginal comments I have in this story, and you can just kind of see which interpretation you find most interesting, you might find most valid. Please let me know on the discussion board if you've got another interpretation, or if you've got another direction you want to spin it. Because I think this is a story rich for interpretation, subjective interpretation. Remember, as long as you can defend it, you can make those reaches. Now, I do want to, before we move into the my marginal comments, kind of the reading journal part of this video, let's talk about the end, because I'll be honest, I still don't know what's going on at the end of this story definitively. I just don't know. The story breaks down, it falls apart. That part I get because the narrator's state of mind is also breaking down, but there's two basic directions I see on the end. One direction is that she is alive at the story's end, and that when John opens that door and he's confronted with just how far she's gone, how he has basically, he's confronted with his own inability to help her, that he shows the ultimate sign of kind of castration or kind of loss of power, that John faints because he sees that he has no control over what he has helped create, that he can't bring her back. And so, some people see that John sees his basic impotence in trying to treat her as a medical doctor. He sees that there's no way he can treat her. He sees that in trying to help her, he's only turned her into this creeping thing that he opens up the doors and he sees. It doesn't even seem human anymore. The way it describes this creeping movement, um, you know, uh, something that comes to mind as far as Hollywood. I feel that there may be some filmmakers who have read the story and the image that they get, they incorporate into movies they've done. Maybe not, but if you ever watch the uncut version of The Exorcist, there's a spider walk scene that I always think of with reading this. Just an unnatural contortion of the body that we see going on in the story. Silent Hill, the first Silent Hill movie, also has a scene with the faceless nurses who kind of contort their body in creepy ways. And then, of course, you've got The Ring, which sees the contortion of her coming out of the TV. So, I mean, it may just be now a horror movie trope of this creeping woman, but I do think it's one that may have its establishment with the story. I can't definitively prove that, but I do think that the creepiness that our author creates, that image of our narrator creeping around the room, and the creepiness it must have of John seeing it and just passing out, it must be uh, pretty intense. Now, there's also interpretation. I don't really know. I like this one, but I don't know if I buy it just for the sake of storytelling purposes. A lot of people think that our narrator is dead, that she's committed suicide, and there's a lot of evidence that suicide is on her mind. We have that rope. We have we'll point out language where she's fond of using suicidal imagery, and even saying the word commit suicide. So there's a lot of ammunition for the narrator possibly committing suicide, hanging herself, and what causes John to faint is opening the door and seeing that she's hung herself. Some people say that's also the creeping around the room, is her body swinging as it hangs. I don't. The biggest problem I have with that is how would the story be told? I mean, if she's connected to a noose, even if she's still alive and strangling when John sees her, she still can't write this down. So I don't, it's neat though. I mean, I hate to be a stick in the mud just because of that one point, especially when there seems a lot of evidence that we'll throw out there that may fit with our narrator ultimately committing suicide in order to get out of the wallpaper. Because that wallpaper symbolism is often described as a prison, and she's trying to pull down this wallpaper to free the phantom that's trapped behind it. The prison bars, that the wallpaper pattern is the prison bar keeping these phantoms trapped, and that once she pulls down this wallpaper, she frees the phantom. Some people think that the symbolism of that is that a woman can only be ultimately free in a patriarchal society that puts those bars over them to keep them where they want them, that they can only be free in life, or free in life in death. Now, if you look at the author's biography, we get some other interesting support for suicide. The author ended up committing suicide. So, do with that what you want. So let's get into the reading journal observations. I'm going to apologize because these are just going to be in the order that I have them in my margins. So you're going to have some things that are questions, some things are just statements, some things are just details that I'll bring to your attention, but there's not going to be a nice little order to them, okay? And I'll just start with how, like I said, that we start this story with this haunted house image. The narrator talks about how the haunted house, when she looks at it, it's the first thing that comes to mind, that the house she's staying at, she'd say it's a haunted house. She also indicates that she got the house, her and John got it pretty cheaply uh, because it had been untenanted for so long. We'll come back to details of the house that don't really add up with what the narrator is telling us, and other pieces of information and details that show us our narrator may not be aware of exactly why she's here, the situation of why she's here, the people that she's surrounded with at this place, she may not be aware of. So we get kind of an equal sign on the first page of the story that John equals science. We have kind of a symbol, and John seems symbolic of the man of science. Uh, she says he has no patience with faith, an intense horror of superstition, and he scoffs openly at any talk of things not to be felt and seen and put down in figures. So John is someone who needs that concrete proof. He is science. He also does not believe that she's really sick. Can you imagine how terrible that is to be not just a woman, but someone who's suffering, and you don't know what's wrong, and you would think the person who would be able to help you figure out what's wrong would be a doctor. When you go to that doctor, the doctor doesn't believe there's anything wrong with you. I'm sure that does happen, and I can imagine it's a very frustrating situation to be. Imagine if that's not only your medical doctor, but also your significant other, your husband, your wife, someone that you would think would trust you no matter what. John here being her husband and her physician, she is sure that he doesn't really believe there's anything wrong with her except a slight hysterical tendency. How frustrating that has to be of an environment. And John further frustrates the situation when we see how he talks to her and how dismissive he is of her, which I'm sure you picked up on. Notice the treatment regimen. She's drugged a lot. I mean, I think it says that every hour she takes phosphates or phosphides. That's a lot of medication she's being given. And I'm sure you know that the 1800s, early 1900s medication was It could be pretty wicked stuff. So I don't think that you're surprised in hearing that our narrator here being given so much medication so often that may help us see kind of the detriment of her mental state. Um, Notice that our narrator here writes uh, in secrecy because she's really not allowed. She knows John doesn't want her to write, but this writing for her is seen as therapeutic. And this goes back to Gilman. Gilman really thought the only way that she maintained her sanity through the rest cure is her ability to write. That's something she did not give up. She refused to give up, but she felt that that was the only thing that kind of saved her from the rest cure that she was prescribed was her writing. An observation I have is that the writing didn't work. The writing didn't pull her out of madness because our narrator continues to write, but as she writes, she continues to descend into this mad state that she seems to be in by the story's end, possibly. Um, Notice there are details that, if you pay attention to this story and how she tells the story, our narrative voice here seems very disjointed. And if you notice, she jumps around quite a bit, probably like I'll do in this video, but you can kind of, if you pay attention to where she jumps, you can kind of see what's on her mind, because you'll notice that several times she'll be on a train of thought that she'll jump quite suddenly and quite unconnectedly, it seems, back to the house or back to the wallpaper especially. So this does kind of indicate, if you look at how disjointed and how often she jumps back to the wallpaper into the room, that may indicate that she is possibly obsessed or, maybe paranoid, things like that. Let's see. We do have that the narrator has anger at John, and it's anger she's not really comfortable with because she thinks John's trying to help her, and she feels guilty that she's mad at him. But I think we understand why she's mad at him when we see how he seems to treat her. She does say that I get unreasonably angry with John sometimes. I never used to be so sensitive. I think it's due to this nervous condition. So it's interesting that she feels guilty for being angry, and that may just make matters worse. But John is very dismissive of our narrator and the narrator's requests to, stop this treatment and stuff like that. Um, Let's get into some of the details of the room, and you'll start to see that they don't quite add up. The narrator thinks that she's in a child's playroom, and we get this because she sees that there are bars on the children, and there are rings mounted in the wall, and that the paint and paper have been torn off, and that, there's stuff that's nailed down, the furniture's nailed down, and that someone has been, looks like biting on the bedpost and things like that. So she looks at all these details and thinks, oh, it must have been a kid's room, must have been a nursery. Now, uh, if you think of those details of bars on the window, of rings on the wall that could be used to restrain with chains, of furniture being nailed down, and of teeth mark on the furniture, we could have more than just a child's room. There are several details that indicate she's in a sanitarium, that this isn't just some old house. If you look biographically at the beginning of sanitariums, a lot of times they would be converted houses. I mean, they would be just like old houses that would be converted into treatment facilities. And that may be the situation of what we have here, where it's actually our author is being treated at a sanitarium. She's just not aware of it. And we'll come back to that as well with other details such as John and who he may really be. Now, notice that we have early on, we have where she's talking about the pattern of the wallpaper and she's trying to figure it out. She says the pattern, she tries to follow the lame, uncertain curves for a little distance, but then they suddenly commit suicide, plunge off at outrageous angles, destroy themselves in unheard of contradictions. So here she's looking at the wallpaper and she sees that the wallpaper, the pattern that it's trying to create, commits suicide and kills itself. We'll go back to details she looks at in the wallpaper, and she sees inside the wallpaper images that seem suicidal images. Um, Notice John's not there very much, and this may get to who John really is. He's away all day, even some nights when his cases are serious. She also says she's glad her case is not serious. So that's a bit of irony there because, it's only going to get more uh, serious as we go. We're several pages into the story before she mentions her baby, and I find that interesting. She mentions Mary, who must be the caretaker for the baby, since she's not able to. She says, I cannot be with him. It makes me so nervous. So we have here the caretaker Mary, who's with her baby, and really we don't have much, if any, other mention of the baby. She just says such a dear baby, and then moves on back to the wallpaper. He said that after the wallpaper was changed, it would be heavy bedstead, and then the barred windows, and then that gate at the head of the stairs too. Notice here this goes into where she expresses concern. She doesn't like the wallpaper. And John's like, well, if we change the wallpaper, then you're going to find something else wrong that I'll have to change, and so on and so forth. My question is, if they have a gate at the head of the stairs, why would they have a gate, a locked gate, by the way, at the head of the stairs? That may go back to where the upstairs that he demands she stays on the upstairs. She wants to stay downstairs, but he demands that she stay upstairs. He has a reason why, but we also have that the upstairs is locked off from the downstairs. That may be further evidence that we're in a sanitarium here, that the upstairs is the ward where the patients stay. Let's see here. He's very dismissive of her concerns. Let's see. We have here um, personification of the wallpaper. Personification's fine, but we have with our narrator, we have kind of a history that she personifies objects. She makes them human-like. She calls them friends and things like that. We'll point out to that. It says when she was a child, she would make friends of objects. She says, the paper looks to me as if it knew what a vicious influence it had. There's a recurrent spot where the pattern lolls, like a broken neck, and two bulbous eyes stare at you upside down. So going back to that suicidal imagery we have here, that the wallpaper pattern looks like a broken neck and two bulbous eyes staring at her. That also reinforces the idea, she says several times, of the wallpaper having eyes that look at her, and this idea of being under surveillance. She's being watched all the time, and that paranoia seems to be kicking in. We do have that indication of her childhood predisposition to imagine, or for acute imagination. She says, I used to lie awake as a child and get more entertainment and terror out of a blank wall and plain furniture that most children could find in a toy store. I used to feel that if any of the things looked too fierce, I could always hop into that chair and feel safe, because she says the chair was a strong friend of hers. So, this may be evidence for the interpretation of, we have here an insane narrator at the start that's pushed into further insanity through the treatment. Okay. Uh, I think it's interesting that we have a bit of a symbol uh, with the wallpaper. She's trying very hard to figure out the wallpaper's pattern. I mean, she spends hours and hours trying to figure out the wallpaper's pattern, and there doesn't seem to be a pattern. I mean, it seems to be just a randomly chaotic design. There's no kind of pattern. She keeps trying to figure it out. And I think this could be symbolically linked to the wallpaper is her life. And the chaos of the wallpaper, if she can figure it out, she'll therefore be able to figure out the chaos of her own life. But she's ultimately not able to do that. In order to free herself from the wallpaper, she has to rip it down. She can't figure out that chaotic pattern, and it may be a pattern that's being placed upon her by male authority that just doesn't fit. That's what's causing the chaos. Her mind keeps coming back to the wallpaper, though, over and over. She'll be on a train of thought, and then she'll do a few sentences on her life, and then she'll go right back to the wallpaper and her struggle with it. We do have Jenny who's here. Jenny seems to be the housekeeper there, who takes care of her when John is away. We also have mentioned that her brother is a doctor as well, and how odd that both her brother and her husband are doctors. It seems like the people that she loves are doctors. Some people use this as evidence that, again, she may be a patient in an insane asylum, and that she's kind of creating roles for the doctors there. So one doctor would be her brother, another doctor, John, would be her husband, but they're really not. If you've seen the movie, I hate to spoiler alert this, but if you've seen the movie Shutter Island with Leonardo DiCaprio, I think that fits very well. This idea of a patient at a hospital not realizing that that's the situation, and that the people, the staff of the hospital, are kind of brought into the life story of the patient in order for it to make sense. Let's move down a little bit. Uh, I'm getting really fond of the room in spite of the wallpaper, perhaps because of the wallpaper. This seems a big shift. Like she shifts from her initial despisement of the wallpaper into starting to love it, and this only grows because by the story's end, she's definitely uh, a fan of the nail paper. She spends all her time trying to figure it out and all that. Uh, we do have that the bed is nailed down. Why is it nailed down? We do have that the pattern is chaotic, and we also know that she's not getting better. She says, "It makes me tired to follow it. I will take a nap, I guess. I don't know why I should write this. I don't want to. I don't feel able. And I know John would think it absurd, but I must say what I feel and think in some way. It is such a relief." So we have this idea that the treatment that John's giving her isn't working. It seems the only relief she has is writing. But John won't let her do this openly. She can only do it secretively. So maybe if she could write more, she would have had a happier ending. But obviously, that's not what happens. It is interesting. She says, "There's one comfort. The baby is well and happy and does not have to occupy this nursery with the horrid wallpaper." Again, she's talking about her baby. Why is there no name for the child? That's odd to me. But again, we have an unreliable narrator. And if she is in the throes of postpartum depression, which is a very real condition, I mean, it's caused by, chemistry changes in your brain after childbirth, possibly. So we have here, she kind of objectifies the baby by, instead of calling it his name, she calls it just the baby. Uh, let's move on. Oh, here we go. Here's a great line from John that really, whether it's a husband, whether it's a doctor, whether it's a stranger, this isn't something that I'd want to hear. "Bless her little heart," he said with a big hug. "She shall be as sick as she pleases. But now let's improve the shining hours by going to sleep and talk about it in the morning." This is where she comes to him and she says, uh, she's not getting better, and John's insisting that his treatment is making her better, and it doesn't seem to be at all to us as well. Uh, Notice how defensive John gets after this because she kind of insists that she's not getting better. She says she's getting better in body, perhaps, and it seems to be that she's going to say next that she's not getting better in mind. But she says, "Better in body, perhaps," I began, and stopped short, for he sat up straight and looked at me with such a stern, reproachful look that I could not say another word. "My darling," said he, "I beg you, for my sake, and for our child's sake, as well as for your own, that you would never for one instant let that idea enter your mind." So here, notice that John kind of guilts her into, hey, I don't want to hear it for my sake, for your child's sake. Oh, yeah, for your sake as well. You don't need to say that. You don't need to disagree with me. Some people notice that there's a mold reference here, that the outside pattern reminds her of a fungus. If you can imagine a toadstool in joints, and some people think it's neat. I mean, maybe it's true. They think this may suggest that the wallpaper may hide fungal spores behind it, mold. And one of the symptoms of mold poisoning would be paranoia, would be mental degradation, uh, things that we kind of see the narrator. So some people argue that the wallpaper is not just kind of supernaturally possessing her, but there's a medical reason that the wallpaper is infecting her with mold spores that's hurting her. But there that is anyway. Uh, Notice we have a detail here about her clothes, and we have here Jenny says that there are yellow smooches and stains on the clothes. She said the paper stains everything it touched, that she found yellow smooches on all my clothes. And so we know that the narrator is working with the wallpaper since it's kind of rubbed off on her clothes. We have another detail we get to, and that's going to be the line. There's kind of like a groove that's worn into the wall of the room. And we find out later on that that groove that's worn into the wall fits perfectly with her shoulder, which leads us to believe that the narrator, without even realizing it, has been pacing around the room so much with her shoulder pressed into it that she has worn a groove into the wall. Um, she doesn't realize she's doing it to the very end of the story, though. But that's what you get with an unreliable narrator. So let's move along. We have another fungus reference. She says, there are always new shoots on the fungus and new shades of yellow all over it. Notice that she says the wallpaper smells yellow. And that's an interesting detail. I mean, how does something smell yellow? Well, this is actually evidence that we may have an insane narrator at the story's beginning, further driven insane, because with mental disorder, sometimes it's common to experience something called synesthesia. And synesthesia is kind of where your neurological your synapses get a little crossed and they fire not in the appropriate way, and your senses get a little conflicted to where you may for example, smell a color, or you may, uh, your sight, sound, all your senses don't really match up with the input and what you're experiencing. But uh, like I can't think of an example other than yellow wallpaper smelling yellow. That doesn't really, I mean, yellow doesn't have a smell, does it? She says, it makes me think of all the yellow things I ever saw. Not beautiful ones like buttercups, but old, foul, bad yellow things. So that's an interesting detail here, that she is definitely being oppressed by the wallpaper, and therefore she starts to tear it down. Uh, Notice the violence that we start to see creep into her narrator. She says that um, it used to disturb me at first. I thought seriously of burning the house to reach the smell. So this was a pretty drastic course of action in order to get rid of that smell that she doesn't like. She can just burn down the house. We're going to see this violence continue to manifest as she starts to, or as she continues to get further and further gone. A streak that runs around the room. It goes behind every piece of furniture except the bed. A long, straight, even smooch, as if it has been rubbed over and over. We know by story's end that this smooch is caused by her shoulder. Why is it not behind the bed? Because the bed is nailed down, so she can't move the bed to get behind it to pace around the wall. But this is, we have here on this page, she has no idea that she's doing that. This pacing around the room, it stained her clothes, but she doesn't know she's doing it. What else is she doing that she's not aware of? Well, she talks about how the bedpost, someone's chewed on it, and we find out at story's end that she has in fact been chewing on it. We don't know how long, but she catches herself, and she doesn't know why she's chewing the bedpost, but she is. It's a creepy story, especially when you see kind of it's an awakening she seems to have, because she seems more aware of what she's doing, but it's not an awakening and a good thing if we have that final image of her creeping around the room, either having committed suicide or just being this kind of monstrous thing creeping around the room. Let's see here. We have images of the prison again, because she says uh, she takes hold of the bars and shakes them hard. Let's see here. Oh, notice here, we have before the end of the story, the narrator quickly announces and moves away from it that she is creeping. She says, I always lock the door when I creep by daylight. I can't do it at night, for I know John would suspect something at once. So here, the narrator seems aware that she is creeping, and we, of course, get back to this creeping state at the story's end. Uh, we have some other details that indicate she's slipping in madness. Often wonder if I could see her out of all the windows at once, but turn as fast as I can. I can only see one out of one at a time. Here she thinks she sees people outside of her window, and if you look into a window, you could also see your reflection cast back. And some people think that that may be what the narrator's seeing, but she doesn't recognize this image of a woman as a reflection of her own self. Uh, there's another interesting detail. She says, I found out another funny thing, but I shan't tell it this time. It does not do to trust people too much. Well, if she's writing this down, not expecting anyone to read it, who is she not trusting here? Why does she not trust herself to write down what funny thing she's found out? That's an odd detail. She's been here for 3 months, so can you imagine being in the conditions that our narrator is for 3 months? It's kind of terrible. Notice we have here towards the end of the story, she does turn violent. She says, I am here and no person touches this paper but me, not alive. That's a pretty far descent from where she was at the story's beginning. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe she was always here. She says, this bedstead is fairly gnawed. And then we notice later on that she is biting the bed. She says, I tried to lift and push the bed until I was lame, and then I got so angry I bit off a little piece at the corner, but it hurt my teeth. So we have here that she has probably been biting the bed, or it may have been a patient before her if she's locked up in a sanitarium. She has rope. I don't know where she got the rope from. She's got a rope tucked away, and some people indicate that this rope is what she uses to commit suicide, if that is in fact what she does. She does say another fungus reference, the strangled heads and bulbous eyes, so that's another suicidal image, and waddling fungus growths just shriek with derision. I'm getting angry enough to do something desperate. To jump out of the window would be admirable exercise, but the bars are too strong even to try. So this is, I mean, she literally says that she would enjoy jumping out the window, but the bars prevent her from doing so. She's secured to a rope, and I don't know what's going on here. She says, I'm securely fastened now by my well-hidden rope. You don't get me out in the road there. I don't know what she's secured to. Some people think she may be secured to the ceiling so she can jump off and hang herself. Notice that she can creep smoothly on the floor, and my folder fits in that long smooch around the wall, so I cannot lose my way. We know that it fits because she's worn it in there. Um, and then, of course, we have the story's end for whatever that is. So we've got a lot of details here that are just odd details that a lot of readers struggle with. What do we do with this? Because not all the details fit with the story that our narrator is trying to give us. But take these details and argue whatever interpretation you have of it on our discussion board, okay? And I look forward to seeing your thoughts. You can help me kind of sway me in a direction of my favorite interpretation this semester at least, or you can also feel free to suggest some other possible interpretations of the story. So thank you for hanging in there for this long video, but I think this story definitely benefits from a bit of explanation. Not explanation, but exploration, I guess I should say. And I hope you explore it further on the discussion board. Thank you.